Good afternoon, everyone. If we could ask you to please take your seats, we're going to make a start. It's great to see a full room, and a warm welcome too to those of you joining us via the live stream this afternoon for the State of European Transport 2025, the second edition. Transport and Environment, T&E, kicked off this exercise last year. So this is version 2. My name is Sonja van Rensen, and I'm pleased to be able to join you again this year to moderate the next hour and a half for you. I'm an energy and climate journalist based here in Brussels and head of strategy for Carbon Pulse, a news agency specialized in carbon markets, net zero, and biodiversity. So we're here this afternoon to reflect on the successes to date of the Green Deal when it comes to transport. So to take stock of where we are and also to look ahead at where we go from here, given the dizzying pace of developments around us and the start of a new political mandate here, and also in some of the big EU member states, notably Germany, I'm thinking of. I guess one of the big topics will be how do we continue and accelerate the decarbonization of transport, whilst also fulfilling the goals, the needs around competitiveness and security. We've got a mix of people in the room, policymakers, industry, civil society. It's okay to disagree. We can agree to disagree, but the aim is to have an interesting discussion. We don't have a huge amount of time and quite a few speakers. We will try and squeeze in some questions if and when possible. So in terms of structure, we're going to hear in a moment from William, who's going to give you a whirlwind tour of the state of European transport. Then we're going to go into a panel, 3 experts, I guess, around road transport and the car industry, also someone from the aviation sector. After that, we'll move it to a fireside talk with 2 policymakers. We'll have Peter Liese from the European Parliament and Chris Balesta from the Polish Climate Environment Ministry. And finally, we round off with 2 high-level commission representatives to give us their takeaways and a view on what comes next. So with that, I'd like to hand over to William. William Totes, Executive Director of T&E, has headed up the organization since 2017 and been with them far longer than that, to give us an overview of where we've got to with greening transports.
I'm not sure where I will stand. I'll go here. Thank you, Sonja. Thank you for introducing. Thank you all for being here. It's a really great pleasure to see this room so full of partners, old friends, T&E's members who have come from all over Europe to be with us here today. A number of distinguished regulators, a number of important business partners that we have. It's really good to be here with you. Now, T&E as an organization, and that's actually the reason why we created the State of Transport, is we are a very specialized organization. We only do transport, and then within our organization, everybody is specialized in something. So we have people doing cars, we have people doing trucks, and we have people doing aviation, and people know about biofuels, and everybody's so specialized. So at some point, I was looking at our website, and I was looking for some general information about how are transport emissions in Europe evolving. And there was no such information to be found on T&E's website, which we identified as a gap, and which is why we created the State of Transport now 2 years ago. And so that is what I will present to you in the next 10 or so minutes, the state of EU transport. And essentially what we're trying to do is we're checking how are we progressing towards T&E's mission. And our mission is the creation of a zero-emission mobility system for all. So where are we and where are we heading? That's what we're going to see in the next couple of minutes. Yes, voila. Now let's start with some basics. The bulk of transport emissions are still coming from road transport. Cars, vans and trucks make up 73% of emissions. Now, that's a lot, it's a big problem, but the good news is that actually this is the easiest part of the transport puzzle. We can decarbonize this part of the transport system relatively easily because we can electrify all of those vehicles. Not tomorrow, but certainly in the next years and decades. Then we have planes and ships, which obviously are a little bit more complicated, but in the last 5 years, we have seen tremendous progress there as well. And then there's trains. They're barely visible on this graph because they don't emit very much. But actually, they do carry a lot of people and they do carry a lot of goods. So in a way, trains are already a pillar of the zero-emission mobility system that we are trying to build. Now let me go to the, let's say, the main message of my presentation, and that is that transport emissions in Europe are starting to see a structural decline. Now this is, it starts in 1990, so it's not so visible. What you see here is a 5% emission reduction between 2019 and 2024. Now you said 5%, what is 5%? Actually, it's a big deal. That is the same amount of carbon that is emitted by 25 million cars. And we are fairly confident that we are not going back to the peak of 2019, because 2024 is the first fully normal year after the COVID and energy crises. Now, why are we starting to see this structural decline? And looking for Sébastien, it's not aviation. That is not the reason we're seeing, and this is not working. Ah, voilà. It is not aviation. Aviation emissions are back. They are almost fully back to pre-COVID levels. And initially we saw a return of the domestic flights. Now we are seeing also the return of the international flights. And if you look at the trend line pre-2019, and if you look at the order books of Airbus, and if you look at the airport expansion plans, I think it is fair to assume that if we do nothing, this trend line will continue to go upwards. So aviation is not the reason transport emissions are starting to see a structural decline. Now what is? It is something that I'm actually really excited about. It is the fact that we have seen a peak in combustion engine sales in Europe in 2019. That's the most ever combustion engine sales we have sold in Europe, and we are never going to go back there. Since then, we have seen a steep decline in engine car sales. And in 2025, we are expecting, despite the changes that are being introduced by the Commission, the 3-year averaging, we'll talk about that more later, we're still expecting to see a significant increase in the sales of battery electric cars to around 20%. Now for trucks, it is going to be around 6%. Now 6%, that doesn't sound like a lot, but for those of you who have been around for a while, you may remember that the idea of battery electric trucks was considered to be a joke 5-10 years ago. So again, this is this huge progress. And what is important, because in Europe we sometimes have discussions as if Europe is an island, peak combustion engine sales is not a European phenomenon, it is a global phenomenon. I really wish this thing would be a bit more responsive. Voilà. Now what is super is that year by year, the power that goes into our vehicles gets cleaner. 70% of our power system is now carbon-free. And most of the growth in carbon-free electricity comes from wind and solar and renewables. So that means that all the electric mobility that we have in Europe, be it cars or trucks or trains, is getting cleaner year by year. And this is one of the big success stories of Europe's climate and energy policy in the last decades, I would say. Of course, there's still a lot of work to be done. And I think one of the things that has frustrated me most in the discussions around climate and energy is that we seem to accept as a God-given fact that Europe is dependent on oil and on energy that comes from faraway places to power our transport system. 96% of the energy that we need to move people and goods around in Europe comes from overseas. Historically, that has come primarily from Russia. Nowadays, it comes primarily from our good friend Donald Trump. And maybe I should add something here. There's a lot of talk about security these days. And I agree that security is extremely important. We should not be dependent on Putin. We should not be dependent on Trump. We should not be dependent on the Middle East. And I think it would be great if in the next years, when we develop our security and military strategy, that we take this fully into account, that if you are dependent on imported energy, you are not secure. And that we understand what the Chinese have understood 10, 15 years ago, that electrification is security. Now, some people say, but you're just trading one dependency for another dependency because you're also importing lithium and nickel. And as a matter of fact, this is largely correct. We are very reliant on lithium, nickel, manganese, etc. imports from overseas. And that is a concern. It's a concern for security, it's a concern for industry and jobs, and frankly, it's also a concern from an environmental perspective, because if we produce in Europe, we have cleaner power, we have higher standards than, for example, in China. But let us be clear, there is a huge difference between depending on oil and depending on lithium, for example. Because we do not burn lithium. When we import the lithium, we put it into a battery. And then we keep that battery on our roads for 15 years. That's how long these things last these days. And after 15 years, maybe we give the battery a second life. And then we recycle it. And that is a huge difference, because oil, like every car we put on the road, requires 12,000 liters of petrol to fulfill its life. For a truck, the number is even more impressive. It's like 460,000 liters of diesel per truck that we put on the road in Europe, which is why we need to phase out combustion engine cars and trucks. Now, these days, climate is a bit less fashionable than it was a couple of years ago, so I want to give you some other arguments why we should get rid of our dependence on imported oil. And one very strong argument is that we are spending a staggering amount of money importing oil from overseas. We spend 250 billion a year on this. And I asked the team, how much money have we spent on oil since I joined in 2011, which is a long time ago. It's interesting, 2011, like that was an energy crisis. People said, oh, the price of oil is so high, so we really got to do something about that. Well, actually, we spent 4 trillion euros importing oil primarily from Russia in the early years since I joined TNE. So I don't know whether that says something about this, my success at TNE or not, but I think it's an interesting fact. Now, some people say that we don't have the money to pay for the transition, that we don't have the money to invest in clean mobility, in clean power, in renovating our homes. And I want to tell you that this is not correct, because we have, in the last couple of years at EU level, agreed what I think is a genuine carbon pricing revolution. We have included shipping in the ETS. We are phasing out free allowances from aviation, and we are creating the world's biggest carbon pricing scheme for land transport and buildings. And all of this combined is going to create huge revenues which can be deployed to finance the transition. Just this year, in 2025, we are expecting 9 billion euros in revenues from carbon pricing for aviation and shipping, or 8.6. That's a big amount of money. It's going to go up to 60 billion a year once ETS2 is introduced. So if people ask you, is there any money for the transition? Yes, there is money. The question is, how do we spend it wisely? Now, I want to end with a final slide, and that is this one. I joined in 2011, and we've all worked very hard to see progress, and sometimes you ask yourself, like, is it actually working? And I think for the first time, we can say that clean transport policies are starting to deliver. The 5% reduction compared to 2019 is evidence of that. But in 2025, we're going to see even greater carbon and oil import savings. And if we keep at it, these savings are going to triple, quintuple by 2030. And what this means in practice is that we're going to have 40 million electric cars on the roads. We're going to have seamless, I'm looking at you, Alberto, we're going to have seamless rail travel all across Europe. We're going to have ships plugging into onshore power in ports. We're going to have a massively improved transport system in Europe. It's going to be good for the climate, it's going to be good for our security, and it's going to be good for the economy. So I want to end on that note. I feel I feel it's important to also be positive these days. Like we hear a lot of bad stuff, especially on the other side of the Atlantic. We are actually on the right track, and the work we are doing is making a big difference. So now is not the time to give up. Now is the time to double down. Thank you.
Thank you very much, William, for I think a very clear, concise yet comprehensive overview of where we're at, and also for ending on a positive, inspirational note. We're going to head straight into our panel. As I said, we'll take about 45 minutes for that. So I'd like to welcome Sebastian Schaffer, Christopher Hook, Sebastian Justum, and Julia Poliskanova. If you'd like to come up and grab a seat. So I'll give a very quick round of intros. Sebastian, so the first Sebastian here next to me, is acting head of office for the Volkswagen Group's EU representation here in Brussels. He's not an engineer, he noted when we spoke earlier. He's a political scientist, joined the company back in 2019, originally as a speechwriter for its then CEO, Herbert Diess. Worked as a sustainability spokesperson, and as I said, has now been heading up the Brussels office the last couple of years. So bringing the view of Europe's largest car maker to the discussion. Next to him, Julia Poliskanova, so here representing T&E, where she's Senior Director for Vehicles and E-Mobility Supply Chains. So here's the resident clean car expert. Christopher Hook, Global Head of Sustainability Strategy at Uber, joined Uber also back in 2019 to establish and run its London Clean Air Plan, and basically oversaw a huge increase in zero-emission vehicles on London's roads in that position. Has also established a number of partnerships for Uber, represented it at fora like COP26 in Glasgow, and on the side is an advisor to various climate tech startups, and has a long experience at the intersection of business and sustainability. And finally, the second Sebastian Justum, who's here from the Air France KLM Group. He's a Senior Vice President and Deputy Corporate Secretary, Head of Public and International Affairs there. Has been doing this since the summer of 2023, and was previously a board member of several French energy companies on behalf of the French state, as a Deputy Head of Energy at the French government's shareholder agency. Which reports to the Ministry of Finance and Economics. So a lot of experience from the energy sector. So what we wanted to do was kick off with a round of questions. I realize you're not all experts on exactly the same subjects, but there's probably enough overlap for a decent discussion. So try and, I'd say just keep your answers short. Feel free to react to one another. We'll try and cover off the main topics, and we'll see if we can squeeze in a round of questions from the audience as well. So first, Sebastian, I'm gonna start with you. So I guess the biggest news of late on the car front has been what William also already referenced. I don't know if delay is the right word, but certainly the spreading out, let's say, of the 2025 target for car CO2 emissions. So it's not just 2025, but it's over 2025 to 2027. So effectively, if you're a car maker, presumably you can do a bit less this year, and you have to then compensate for that next year and or the year after. Volkswagen was in favor of this, I understand. So one, I guess, are you happy? What does this bring you? And how does it impact your electrification plans, and specifically the plans to scale up small, more affordable models, which is something we haven't seen much in Europe to date? Does that mean we're now going to have to, we may see a delay in those coming to market?
Mic actually working? Yeah, now it is. First of all, of course, I was listening carefully to William, as there's always a lot to learn, and I agree with a lot of the presentation. You know, if you are responsible for more than 40% of the total emissions in the transport sector, There is no cheating around. There is no finger pointing at others. You have to stand up for your own responsibility. And I also agree with you that we are lucky because as an automotive sector, in comparison to others, we already have the technology to decarbonize. So that's a good thing. And then I listened very carefully because you said 2024 was the first normal year of the pandemic. And you were showing a graph. And this graph was indeed showing a decline in internal combustion engine production or purely ICE cars. But it was also showing for 2024 two phenomena. First of all, the market has not recovered on pre-pandemic levels. We have a volume around 2 million less than before. That is a lot of pressure on the industry to consolidate, and that, of course, weakens also our ability to invest. And the second point that you overlooked was that we had a decline in BEV sales in comparison to 2023. So that, of course, is the perfect sum, which then leads me to your question, why are we advocating for an additional flexibility in the CO2 regulation for 2025 to 27. We had to face a situation where because the market demand isn't there, I mean, the skilled workers are there, the factories are there, the cars are there to a large extent, but the demand wasn't there. So that is why we had to find a solution to avoid billion euros of penalty payment, either of pooling payments to Elon Musk or to Chinese competitors, or pay billions of fines, which then weaken our investment, or starting a destructive pricing discount war in the market in 2025, which then, to say it with my German grandmother, if something is cheap, it's not cheap without reason, which would then damage the product, of course. So that is why we think that the proposal of the Commission in the end was a good compromise. You know, we could have aimed for more. I see Kurt Vandenberg is sitting there, so he can witness that. But I think it is a fair political compromise because in the end, the CO2 targets stay untouched for the next 3 years, but we have indeed, as you've said, a certain flexibility to overcompensate in the coming years for the very difficult year that we have in 2025. And to answer your last question, I know you were asking for short answers. I can assure you we are not holding back affordable electric cars because of an additional flexibility in the CO2 regulation. We are going to introduce our ID2 family around 25,000 euros in the next year. And we are going to introduce our ID1 entry-level electric car in 2027, which will then be around 20,000 euros. Now you might say there are already cars in the market which are cheaper even than 20,000 euros, and I agree. But those are cars that are not produced in the European Union. So our ambition is, of course, you know, to become a bit melodramatic at this point. We stick to the principle that European industrial workers must be able to buy their own product. And that is not just something about our industry, it's something about our society as a whole. And that is why it is so important that the transformation actually includes affordable electric cars which are produced in Europe. Because, that's, if you do not manage to achieve this goal, you will lose the acceptance for the whole transformation.
Okay. Thank you for the explanation of why this year is difficult, why you welcome the flexibility, and then the confirmation that the plans for the ID2 and ID1 series are basically, you say, on track and are not impacted by this latest policy development. Okay, Chris, let's go to you. So one of the I guess future pieces of policy or legislation we're now expecting is a proposal to green corporate fleets as a way of also greening the whole I guess the entire car fleet, since a lot of sales ultimately are corporate car sales. And as part of that, an EU target, actually, an EU electrification target for corporate fleets. What's your view on that as Uber? And how would that accelerate your own plans for going green? Would that be a welcome development from your perspective?
Well, first off, thank you for having me. It's so nice to be back in Brussels again. Yeah, we've been in favour of that proposal for a long time. I think fleets can represent a really important part of this transition. We saw some of those charts there in terms of the relative role of cars in our emissions from transportation. Fleets represent a big share of new car sales particularly. And when you get to electrify new cars, they can ripple through into the rest of the ecosystem and become the used cars of the future. And so for a fleet like Uber, that's very important because our drivers predominantly buy used vehicles, and we need those vehicles to get to a price point that's going to make sense. We've been very proud to date of the progress we've managed to make at rapidly electrifying our own fleet of vehicles. We think we're going about 5 times faster than the market, and I think that is really helping drive real-world emissions reductions because those cars get used a lot in our city centres. So yes, we're very much in favour of that proposal. For it to really work, it has to be a combination of raising the floor, ensuring everyone is rising to those standards, and providing the incentives that people need to make those purchases. But if we can get that equation right, I think it's a really positive step.
Okay, and I guess, at a minimum, what would need to be in it? So you said raising the floor. Does there need to be a specific target for electrification in there? And if so, how ambitious should that be?
I think the target we've advocated for is 2035. And I think as long as everyone is playing on the same playing field, then I think we're in a good spot. We see that across lots of the markets in which we operate. It's good for certain companies or certain organizations to try and lead, but ultimately you want everybody to be coming along at the same speed.
Okay, thank you. I'll give the others a chance to react in a bit. Okay, let's go to the other Sebastian. So as I said, representing the Air France KLM group. So we're going to just shift gears a moment to aviation. So as we heard from William, it's not thanks to aviation that there is, the first indication of a structural decline in transport emissions. Aviation is still growing. Aviation emissions are growing largely because simply demand is growing. There's more air travel. We do have policies now to tackle aviation emissions. Thinking EU ETS and Refuel EU Aviation are probably the two biggest ones. To what extent are they having an impact on your business? Are they helping you go in the right direction? Are they facilitating the switch to sustainable fuels? I guess how significant are they in the business decisions you make?
Now it works?
Yeah.
Thank you for the question. So indeed, coming back to the chart and the figures that you were alluding to, aviation is, I think, a very dynamic market, especially outside the EU. So we do not fit so much, I would say, in the forefront of the expansion of our fleet and customers. And I will come back to that because it's a very, I would say, contrasted situation depending whether you look at EU companies like us or non-EU. Then on your question, of course, it's a very positive step, and we have, I think, since the beginning, as a France KLM and our aviation association supported and worked alongside the Commission for the Green Deal and then Refuel EU that kicks in starting this year. Why? Because first, it's very useful to align, I would say, the whole sector to a collective goal, and as we are, as a France KLM, quite front runners on that matter, being the first worldwide buyer of SAF in 2023 and 2024, we were really thinking that it was the best way to align, notably on the demand side, to have concrete, I would say, and quantitative targets to be set up at European level. So that was clearly with ETS kicking in for intra-EU flights, and then Refuel EU right now addressing two of the, I would say, pillars of decarbonization for aviation, clearly. Notably on the SAF side, because whereas car makers, we do not have yet H2 or electric planes properly working yet for, I would say, our networks. So we rely mostly on fleet renewal, so by, I would say, quieter and cleaner planes. That's pillar number one. And then pillar number two, buying more and more SAF and eSAF, hopefully, from 2030. So that's why we were really supportive of this whole package, and I think it's good to be in a position to work with institutions on that. Nevertheless, I think that now, as all other sectors as well that we discuss with, the issue is, I would say, on the economics and the industrial policy that could complement this, notably on the supply side. Right now, the SAF production, I would say, is sufficient for the sector in Europe, but it probably won't be the case in a few years. And for eSAF, we of course work very hard with TNE, SkyPower, and other platforms to have that type of projects, I would say, working and become a reality, but it's not yet assured. So that's the first, I would say, next frontier from our standpoint, to have industrial policies, of course, coming from private initiative and also maybe some public regulations initiative as well, to have the supply side secure on both SAF and eSAF. And then I would say as well on the competitive side, coming back to what I was saying, that the aviation sector is very contrasted with non-EU carriers that really are growing footprint since around 20 years. In Europe, I think it's really also the time to try to think together or how to offset part of the, I would say, gap between fossil fuel and SAF and eSAF.
Okay, so it's the challenge for you is economics. There's enough SAF supply out there, but it's a lot more expensive than the fossil alternatives. Which brings us maybe to the clean industrial deal. And Julia, I wanted to give you a chance to kick off with, I guess, something that's a bit more of a big picture item. But it's been the talk of the town, and I guess some of these other initiatives, also the flexibility on the 2025 car CO2 target, are all in the vein of we need to stimulate competitiveness. We need to make sure industries still exist if we want them to invest in low carbon alternatives going forward. What's your take from a transport and energy perspective on the clean industrial deal? Are we there? The foundations are sorted, and it's a question of moving forward within this framework, or are you, I guess, slightly more apprehensive and you still see gaps?
Yes, absolutely. Great to be here at our second big event. I would say first, I will answer your question, but I would really like to react to what Sebastian said on cars. Yeah. Everyone who knows me in the audience, I hope will forgive me taking 2 minutes for that. I think it's a critical question. Is it really the consumer or is it really the product? And to answer that, you have to understand the way the regulation works in Europe, whereby we have a 5-year targets. So there is an uptick in the new target once every 5 years. Everyone prepares, lots of car makers here in the room, and in that year they bring new products and EV sales go up. But what it means that in between, there's a bit of a lull, and there's no incentive to bring new models on the market. I can tell you one fact. Last year, the average price of an electric vehicle in Europe was 45,000 euros. There were no affordable models, not many new models. You tell me how big the demand is for a 45,000 euro vehicle. That is the problem. It's not like people just woke up after 2023, in 2024, in January, and was like, you know what, I don't feel like buying an EV this year. They just didn't have the product for their need. Now, it is changing really quickly, and that's why we are a little bit, we are really upset about the weakening of the 2025 target, because the products are coming, the demand is already going up, and in that moment, we're changing the targets. And there is a big concern that we will delay some of these affordable models. It's great to hear, Sebastian, what you said, that you don't plan to do that, so we'll try and keep a close eye on that and point that out. But generally speaking, the demand is the direct connection of the product on the market, and we can't separate the two. Now, on the question of clean industrial deal, it does represent a lot of really new and positive thinking. As TNE, we said for a very long time that as we decarbonize, this cannot result in deindustrialization. So we do need it together. And it's really great. The Commission does confirm, the roots of decarbonization and goes with new policies. Some good things announced are, for example, around lead markets. So policies to really scale recycled clean materials here in Europe. And that's something that we hope to see more of to really have that European preference. There's a new paradigm on trade, for example, which is also really excellent, and we'll see some policies that will really help us here on the continent to build things here. But, and there's definitely a but, there's a lot of things that are really missing. And I don't want to take too long, because there's a lot of things that can be improved. I will just point out 3 things quickly. The first thing is that it still remains a strategy document with lots of intentions, but no actual action. You know, it's a deal, but it doesn't do much. So we just need to start doing, get the detail, get stuff done. It also is not very good around the investment chapter of it. We do need more money, absolutely, to scale some of the technologies, fuels, for example, batteries. But we also need to just do better with the money we already have. We spend so much money around the member states in subsidies, what is called state aid. Today it's intransparent. It's really completely opaque. We don't know what projects it's going to, but it's a lot of money. So really reforming that and making it a little bit more like what the US are doing with their production aid would really accelerate exactly the type of fuels and technologies that we need. And the Commission so far has been very timid. The last point is that, of course, for us as an NGO, it's been really bittersweet that alongside Clean Industrial Deal, which does announce some good ideas, we also had Omnibus that actually completely decimated some of the responsible investing and supply chains agenda. So we are confirming some of the CO2 targets, but we are really moving back on some of the supply chain legislations that we worked with for years. So bittersweet overall, but as I said, a few good ideas, and we're really open to work with the Commission and everyone else to put them in practice in the coming years.
Okay, thank you. Sebastian, maybe come back to you with a look. So feel free to respond to, I mean, what Julia said, and this worry that with the pressure coming off a bit, there is nonetheless, there is a risk of delays creeping in, even if those intentions are not there at present. And maybe looking ahead to the targets further into the future, as 2030 and then 2035, and how ready are you for those? And does this the shift in the 2025 target, is there a possible, if not immediate effect, but a knock-on effect? Are you still committed to a full phase out by 2035? Or can we expect in the coming years to hear, well, this flexibility has been helpful, it would probably be useful to extend that?
Well, that leads me back to the question that Julia asked just a few minutes ago. Is it really the customer? And of course, yes, for us, it's the customer. The customer has to buy the cars. If you ask me if we are ready for any target, I say yes, we are ready. We are prepared to scale up electromobility. Against all myths, we have been happy for every electric car that we were able to sell in 2024, and we will be happy for every electric car that we are able to sell in 2025. But the very fact is also that the margins are slim. And it is hardly a profitable business nowadays. And so things have to be brought together. It doesn't make sense to just set goals and then let industry deliver on them. We have to have an ecosystem around that. And I do not want to avoid your question about the next steps on the ladder, so to speak. The main message and the most important message, because that's how I started, we have a responsibility that we cannot avoid, and that means we stand by the goal of 100% decarbonization. The 100% goal for Volkswagen Group is clear, and we support it, and we continue to support it. Full stop.
I noticed there's no 2035.
Yeah, exactly. That leads me back to the question of the customer. We will be able to deliver every electric car that the customer is willing to buy in 2030, in 2035. But we have learned from the last years with living with the CO2 regulation that soft landings are helpful. We had a phase in 2021 without any major turmoil in the market. And then we had an emergency discussion and a lot of alarmism around 2025. Because we had no such phase-in, we had no such averaging. And so we think that further flexibilities, further smoothening of the path to zero might make sense, but that's for us, and that's also a clear message I want to deliver today. For us, it is now about getting 2025, the quick fix, implemented in a focused way without using this opportunity, so to speak, for some to make a wish list of what else to change about the CO2 regulation. That is our clear pledge. Let's now stick to what has been agreed with the Commission's president and in the Automotive Action Plan, let's have this quick fix for 2025, and then we will have the chance to discuss in a structured and fact-based way in the review if there are further modifications and flexibilities required because the market requires them. But talking about that, I mean what I say, modifications and flexibilities, not a complete change of the system. That is not what we are up to.
Okay.
That's not what Julia makes. Julia
answer.
is not all too happy for that, but I can tell you for the industry side, that is quite a bold announcement.
Okay, so yeah, so you're committed to a fully decarbonized, fully electric fleet, but there may be, as you've said in the past, soft landings have been helpful, and there may be need for a discussion around additional flexibilities and modifications without abandoning that target. Yeah.
Well, yes. I mean, the Commission itself has announced that it will find a certain solution to include e-fuels. That's a given. That's also something that we support, but that should not distract us from the major challenge. And the major challenge and the major task that we have together is the ramp of electromobility. And that's by far the most efficient, that's by far the most affordable technology, and it will prevail. Full stop.
Be brief, because I'm going to go to other.
Yes,
Sebastian,
absolutely. I understand. We want to talk about all topics. And look, where we are with 3-year averaging. This has now happened, and we can have a whole day debate about it, but where we are. But what maybe we can understand around 2035 is what is such an urgency or emergency to reopen and change it now. 2035 is far away. And it's so critical for everyone in the supply chain to prepare, right? We have over a decade, and we have battery companies and the linked investments, we have charging companies. They all want that certainty to really start preparing. Isn't it this time, actually, to really try and get it all in order? And then, after we've all really tried, and you have really tried, and your competitors tried, and we come maybe to 2032, we can see where we are. But why would we kill the, I would say today, only actually industrial decarbonization strategy we have for the certainty in the market so early on before we've even started?
Well, I wouldn't agree with your wording that anyone here, especially me, is advocating to kill the CO2 regulation. That was definitely not my intention. And I come back to what William said in the very beginning. If 2024 was the new normal, then we have a problem. And so what we need, and why the regulation itself has a review foreseen, is that we have to synchronize the market ramp up and the regulation. We have to have certain milestones. That's how we as a company work. We set a goal, we do everything to achieve it, and we need certain milestones to check if we are still on track. And that stays, from our point of view, that is just a sound approach, and that is why this review is important. But again, it is not important to put everything, to turn everything around and to question the basic strategy. It is just to make a reality check and to see if we have to make certain adjustments according to the market without losing the goal out of sight.
Okay, thank you. Other Sebastian, since you brought up the issue of fuel, so you've been, Air France KLM has been one of the early users, one of the front runners when it comes to SAF from advanced biofuels. So a question on how fast do you believe you can get to net zero, and what's the role of advanced biofuels, other kinds of SAF, but notably also e-fuels in that? And if there's going to be potentially e-fuels in the road transport sector too, does that, I guess, do you think, great, that's an opportunity for more economies of scale, the e-fuel market's going to get bigger, or does it make you nervous thinking, well, we don't really want another sector siphoning off these valuable fuels that by all rights should be ours?
Thanks. Well, of course, we are happy that every sector is committed to the same goals. The difference is in aviation, we sadly yet do not have, I would say, technological electric solutions. So in our view, but it's quite, I would say, industry industry-wise, we should prioritize fuels and biofuels and e-fuels for aviation, just because it's one of the most efficient way towards Paris Agreement and ICAO long-term aspirational goal. So for us, it's a no-brainer, and as I said, RefuelEU is clearly, I would say, accurate in targeting this type of supply, which is, of course, a huge part of the cost of an airline and also a huge cost of a bill and the final price for the consumers. Yet going back to, I would say, also Green Industrial Deal, we await the Sustainable Transportation Investment Plan of the Commission. We are very happy to contribute to that, notably alongside TNE within the Sky Power platform that advocates and made some very concrete proposals toward eSAF, notably emergence. As you said, it's also not only a decarbonization topic, but a geopolitics of energy, I'd say, matter very relevant for the EU, because at the same time you can help a whole sector to decarbonize, and at the same time you can hope that EU takes the lead in these emerging technologies. But for that, first we need some legal and financial engineering, for instance, long-term offtake agreements, some kind of financial schemes. We've seen the chart of revenues that are taken from ETS, so it's true, there are financial, I would say, ways to work. Our proposal, for instance, is to earmark part of these revenues to decarbonization of aviation and, for instance, to intervene in some eSAF contracts. Of course, the public spending only comes on top of, I would say, private, robust business cases, but if it's accurate and spent wisely, it could be an interesting step forward for the Sustainable Transportation Investment Plan. Then, of course, as we are here dealing with private initiatives projects, we, as an airline, we do not invest in equity in such projects because it's still too early and it's not our job, but we support it as letters of intent and MOUs, and I would say try to help these projects kicking in. But also it's a matter, I would say, of market organization. If fossil fuels are still, I would say, quite cheap, then there is still a very huge gap to offset. There are already some tools like SAF allowances, which is a positive tool, but it ends in 2031, and it only covers 20% of the emissions of aviation. And I would say there is no, I would say, a long-term visibility on that kind of tool, so we think that it needs to be extended and looking forward to that type of discussion. So a great topic to work on that, and a mix between, I would say, private initiative and public creativity on that, and we really think that the EU could take the lead to help the decarbonization of aviation, and at the same time to gain some technological and R&D, also very interesting knowledge and knowledge management on that.
In terms of types of fuels, so you're looking at e-fuels and biofuels? Absolutely.
We are quite agnostic, I would say, that we say always we support every type of technology that is proven efficient to reduce GHG. So, of course, under precise EU standards or ICAO standards, we, of course, now mostly buy HEFA stuff in aviation, but for e-fuels, looking forward to any type of H2 or carbon CO2, I would say, sources that can be recycled in this type of electrolytic, for instance, solution. So really agnostic on the technologies, as long as it, of course, fits the highest levels of standards, and when it's effective in terms of CO2 emissions reduction.
Chris, if we heard a little bit about what Air France KLM Group is doing, as Uber, what are you, I guess, how are you working with others to, with car makers to enhance electrification? I understand you do have actual partnerships in place with car companies, but in other parts of the world, not necessarily here in Europe. Is that so? And if so, why not? Maybe talk us through something like your Spark scheme, so what you're actively doing, I guess, to accelerate the decarbonization of cars in this case.
Yeah, happy to do that. And we do actually have a lot of partnerships here in Europe too. Partnerships is pretty central to our strategy. We've got to make sure that the drivers are in a position to be able to buy or lease or rent the electric vehicles and then use them on our platform. And so we've tried to build an ecosystem of relationships with companies who make the cars, like Volkswagen, people who are able to lease or finance those vehicles to Uber drivers, and then charging companies. We're talking a little bit about fuel. In our case, we're thinking a lot about how do you get the electrons into the vehicle and what's the right infrastructure in terms of where it needs to be how easy it is to use, and build confidence with drivers, and then what kind of investments we can make ourselves. So the Spark program that you talked about was us trying to get that ecosystem moving. We identified who we thought would be the best partners to provide affordable vehicles to drivers, tried to use our position and our scale to ensure we could get those at the best possible price. And then we set up schemes where we could help drivers save for either deposits or down payments on those vehicles to, again, help with the affordability. You mentioned the 45,000 euros. You know, buying a new EV is an expensive endeavor, even if you're going to use it for your job. And so we've been trying to run schemes to help people do that. And I think that's some of why we've been able to help electrify pretty quickly in certain cities. I'd probably say two things about what we've noticed over the period of the last 4 or 5 years. We worked with T&E and others on how to do that, which is that that equation about the cost of ownership is getting a lot better. We monitor very closely what does it mean for someone not just to purchase a car, but to run that car. And we're not there yet in every market by any means. There's still some way to go, but we're getting a lot better, and that's particularly true in places where charging is improving. Charging is a very big shift for someone moving from a fossil fuel vehicle to an electric vehicle, but in terms of how you operate and also what you have to think about. And so we do a lot of work to try and ensure that drivers feel confident in that transition. And the cities that have got more ubiquitous charging, particularly in neighborhoods where Uber drivers live or where they're doing a lot of trips in and out of the city center, have really managed to accelerate electrification and left behind some of their peers where that's not so true.
Yeah. And do you see I guess a risk for you of the current, I guess, just relativizing of the Green Deal and trying to calibrate that more with other goals like security, competitiveness, and less appetite? Certainly, you mentioned the omnibus proposal when it comes to things like sustainability reporting initiatives and so on, and just, a little bit more apprehension and perhaps slowing down of some of these more ambitious initiatives.
I don't know that any of that stuff is going to change our minds on the fact that this is the future for us. You know, we firmly believe that electric is where our business is going, and we want to get to a zero emissions platform. And so we'll keep doing the work to get there, and ultimately we will rely on, our work, but also the work of our partners to get us there. Be that things like disclosure, but also the core of what we're trying to do at the operational level of getting these cars out onto the road.
Okay. We don't have that much time left. Julia and maybe Sebastian too. I guess coming back to the competitiveness issue, and you've both touched on it already. How can the EU make the most of decarbonizing through EVs, which, as we heard, that's been the main driver of the decline you've reported on this year, and yet a lot of those EVs have come from China. So on the one hand, we're trying to promote European industry and competitiveness, and it needs to be made in Europe. On the other hand, it may be cheaper, it may be quicker and cheaper to decarbonize if we simply, if we do import more. So how do we reconcile? Well, can we reconcile those two goals? And I guess as a corollary to that question, can Europe establish its own EV supply chains? And I'm thinking of the unfortunate example of Northvolt as a suggestion. It's not going to be easy.
Yes. Big question, tough question. I'll try and be brief. I just came also from Benchmark's event on batteries called Giga, and this is what everyone is talking about. How can we do it? Why is it not happening? What went wrong with Northvolt? So first of all, I think it's important to remember that regardless of where electric vehicles come from, they're key to decarbonization. Slowing down is not an option. But as I mentioned earlier, it's really important that as we decarbonize, and we can't lose momentum on that, we put in place policies so we also don't deindustrialize. And I would add now also another aspect of security. Because actually, just like with gas, the taps were open and it was all really great, and then something changed and the taps are closed. It can be the same with batteries. Right now, you have Chinese companies happily importing them into Europe. What happens if one day they're said by the government, Chinese government, they're not allowed to, right? Can we afford not to be able to make one battery locally? I don't think so. What do we need? At least a few things. Now, First of all, I do think that we need to, as Europe, understand our strength. And today, our strength is the size of our market. We're a big market. It's really attractive for investors to come and produce here when we are clear. So many battery CEOs, when they announced plans in Europe and were asked, why are you doing this? They said, because of the 2035 phase out. I know there will be an EV market. So keeping clear targets, the car CO2 targets, but also adding, for example, fleets is really important. So fleets is a beautiful industrial and social policy. If you ask fleets to go electric a lot faster, 2 or 3 years down the line, you have a cheap EV for everyone who buys a second-hand car. And you also, for the car industry, de-risk millions of actual electric vehicle sales. So these targets, setting them is really important. On top of targets, we need to beef up a number of industrial policies. I mentioned some of them. There's a lot more we can do on better investment in terms of production aid, better trade policies, and much better local content or local preference policies. We can do it via sustainability rules, for example, CO2 thresholds, but it needs to be simple to work. But finally, I do want to make another observation, and I think that's broader from the systems perspective. It will not work if we just replace every petrol SUV with an electric SUV. That's not what we want. And also for a continent that's not a mining power, why would we do this? It's a complete waste of resources. So we need to start alongside those broad industrial policies, putting in place the policies to drive towards smaller, more affordable, cleaner vehicles. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. The French are doing it with their eco bonus, for example. So if we turn this into a European eco score, we will start incentivizing both the industry and consumers to purchase that. So we'll have not just a decarbonized and a local system, but also a more efficient one. And I think a bunch of these policies need to happen for us to really get grips with getting the EV supply chain here.
Okay, thank you. Sebastian, maybe a comment too on the corporate fleet greening law, which, we've heard mentioned several times. Are you enthusiastic about that? And then on the battery, I guess made in Europe, the Salzgitter, the PowerCo initiative, how's that going? Are you on track to start production in 2025?
Yeah, so many points to refer to, even from your question and even more from what Julia has just said. Maybe just 3 short remarks from my side. First one, talking about competitiveness. To become a winner in electromobility is a crucial question of global competitiveness for Europe. China is going electric, South America is going electric, the UK is going electric. Do we really think that we can exist as a European automotive industry in a cozy niche of refining yesterday's technologies? Certainly not. So we have to catch up. Second point on that, if you want to be a winner in electromobility, you have to be master of your own product, so to say, means you have to have your own battery production. That is why we as Volkswagen Group founded our company PowerCo. It is actually kind of, I read somewhere we are the last one standing, not completely true, but we are certainly the biggest battery cell manufacturer in Europe, and we have our 2 factories in Valencia and in Salzgitter fully operating. Yes, we stick to our target. Salzgitter is going to start the production in 2025. This year, Valencia will follow in the coming year, presumably. And of course, it's tough. It's tough because of energy prices, because they're simply not competitive. We need to still find some convincing answer to the IRA mechanism, means some kind of operational funding, and we're happy that we at least have open discussions with that, about that, also with the political institutions. And of course, we have to have a higher demand in the market so that the market for the batteries that we are producing is there. So yeah, battery is crucial. And now, finally, Green Fleets initiative, I look into Kurt Vandenberg's eyes, and I look into Simone Ritzek-Seidel's eyes, and I see a Green Fleets initiative coming. We haven't asked for it. We are not convinced that it is just another quota that will save the auto industry. We think that national tax schemes have actually proven quite efficient. But we are realists. We see it coming, and so now it is about discussing how we can shape such a regulation so that it doesn't harm our business, so that it is not a further tightening of the CO2 targets around through the back door. And so let's try. We will have a constructive approach, but we want to be very clear this is not a solution. So that can be an add-on in a complete strategy, but that is something that we are not building our strategy on, certainly.
Yeah.
Maybe echoing on the aviation sector on one of the points that you've tackled both, there's really something to work together on external trade defense instruments and competitiveness between the EU and the non-EU. Just sharing two questions to our audience and our fellow experts. Do we all find normal that, for instance, going from Paris to Tokyo, you have, I would say, more regulation and less incentives to decarbonize and going through a hub which is situated in the middle and in a non-EU territory? That's a carbon leakage, and we think also it needs to be dealt with the overall policies. That's point number one. Question number two, when it comes on competitiveness, in aviation, we have agreements between the EU and non-EU geographies, for instance, for the Gulf or Middle East, with a lot of environmental clauses, fiscal clauses, and I would say level playing field intentions that are currently not applied. If we want to be comprehensive and to really effective in decarbonization, we also need to have I think, a shift in the mindset and in this type of instruments that are not directly linked to the Green Deal and RefuelEU, for instance, but in the overall, I would say, appreciation of the dynamics of the markets for a global airline like us that is exposed to in the same routes to non-EU carriers. We need at least to have this reflection with the Commission and as an industry to also try to offset this type of distortions of competition. If you do not tackle this, then there is, I would say, a harder burden on EU airlines, and then we will close a route and be replaced by a non-EU carrier. In terms of CO2 emissions overall, and coming back to the chart, I do not think that's a net really, I would say, upside for the planet.
Okay, thank you. I think we're going to have to bring it to a close. You've ended us on a very big note, so it's maybe a good moment to bring in two policymakers to tackle some of those big questions. Can we have a round of applause for our panel? And I know we haven't made time for questions formally, but there is a drink after this for an hour, so I would suggest that you approach our panelists over that drink if you want to put questions to them. Could I invite up Chris Bolesta and Peter Liese for the next part? So what I wanted to do was, move from. You can sit, huh? You can sit. You're allowed to sit. I can sit if that makes you more. So what we wanted to do was get two policymakers up here, and we don't have masses of time, but we've got, let's say, 15 minutes at least, 20 minutes, to talk through some of the questions over where we're at on transport and what comes next. So next to me, Peter Liese, here from very close by, the European Parliament, whereas he's the EPP's environment coordinator. He's been with the Parliament for many years, is an expert on energy and climate issues, was rapporteur, for example, on the last EU ETS reform, is also a substitute on the ITRE committee. And then we've got Chris... ETS legend. And Chris Bolesta, State Secretary from the Polish Ministry of Climate and Environment, an economist originally, has also spent many years in Brussels with 2 stints at the European Commission, most recently heading up its CCUS team. And perhaps relevant to today's discussion, has also previously worked for a think tank promoting electric vehicles specifically, so has some specific expertise to bring to today. So we've prepared, I guess, a couple of questions, and thought I could put those to each of you. The first one was kind of looking at, I guess, where we are now and what are priorities for each of you moving forward. I thought secondly, we could touch indeed on the car CO2 standards, the impact of, the delay that we've heard about. And thirdly, speak about ETS2 and the one, is it coming in 2026? And two, what are the implications for that when it comes to decarbonizing transport further? There's probably a whole bunch of other topics, so feel free to bring those in, but I thought we could kick off with those three and see how far we get. Preference for who starts? Or are you Chris? What are you looking for from a Polish perspective from the EU to continue the progress that we've heard is for the first time? I think it's the first time we've heard at least a signal of perhaps a structural decline in transport starting to emerge.
How many wishes I get?
3.
3, okay. First wish, infinite wishes. Seriously though. You mentioned that I have some experience in electric vehicles. In Poland, I'm still regarded by some people as an electric car lobbyist. So that's something funny actually. What I expect from Europe in terms of decarbonizing transport, I think priority number 1, and it's extremely important now, considering what's happening in the world that went crazy, at least some parts, most of the parts. We need to continue with repower. We need to continue with repower. We need to continue with getting rid of all Russian fuels. And I think it impacts our efforts to decarbonize transport as well. Because it's basically fueling our cars with imported fuels from Russia. It's basically a security risk. And because of the fact that the world went crazy, that I think impacts also other sources of imports. So getting rid of imports is basically good for us. It's more money in our budgets, and it's less security risk. So first step, propose the roadmap to complete the repower. Second ask I would have from the Commission is to propose a truly a true automotive strategy. I think it's quite interesting that we are trying to find a fix last minute before a legislation was trying to bite. I think it's actually quite embarrassing on us. We basically wasted a very good opportunity to have a meaningful automotive industry strategy. One of my bosses used to say that a good crisis in Brussels is a very good opportunity to legislate. And we had a diesel scandal, and we wasted it. So I think there's a very opportune time to have an automotive transition strategy, because today what we see is that we are, and I mentioned this, that imported oil is a security risk. But now what we're doing, we are swapping one security risk to another, because we are replacing imported fossil fuels for imported technology from China and other directions. The fact that we gave our automotive players an opportunity to actually pay foreign companies to actually deliver their reductions, it's absurd. So I think a tangible strategy to transition away from the combustion engine, we need that. Second point. And the third point, and I look at you, please, more time to implement ETS2, because this impacts our societies. The Commission is doing a lot of opening certain files in Green Deal. Now the cars, the omnibuses are now coming in drones. But the one legislation that is affecting people is remaining unchanged. So my third plea would be to give us more time to actually delay implementation of ETS2.
Thank you. Same opening question to you. What are your top 3 priorities in this new era?
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. And in fact, today is a historic day in Germany. I just talked to Kurt Vandenberger. And I will remind everybody about the speech of Dan Jørgensen, the Energy Commissioner, last Thursday. He said, when you Google the most important name in Denmark, it was Taylor Swift. In Europe, here in Brussels, it's definitely Mario Draghi. But in Germany, it's most likely Friedrich Merz. You know, today a big step has been done to agree to the new coalition. I know Friedrich Merz for many years, in fact 37 years. I was grown up 10 kilometers away from him, and we still live very close, and we are very close. He's not well known as a climate campaigner, but yeah, that's a bit also a bias in the public, because, you know, in the party congress, for example, he said, before the base of our economy comes the base of our natural resources. And in a debate on ETS, he said the European Union is on its way to solve, in a market-based way, the biggest challenge that we have despite war and peace. And, you know, since today, the climate neutrality target of 45 climate neutral in Germany is in our constitution. And that has been, of course, challenged also by some of my party fellows. But Friedrich Merz always said, I'm committed to this. And I think that's why you have a clear indication from Germany that we will not challenge the targets with the new government. But of course, he's one of the promoters of doing it different, and he aligns also, of course, with Mario Draghi. More common market, more technologically openness, more working with industry, simplification. So that's the way to go. And one important point is cheap electricity. I know people that went climate neutral to their work every day and back with a hybrid car, and then they saw the bill of the electricity in 22, and they sold their electric car or the hybrid car, because we had so horribly high electricity prices that it really didn't pay off. And that needs to change. It has changed, of course, since 22, but it needs to change even more. We need to focus on cheap electricity. That is key to decarbonize the whole economy, but also transport, in particular road transport. Second point on ETS2. You know, I take it very serious what the Polish government says, not only our friend Bolesta, but also Donald Tusk himself. And we need to react. We need to come forward with answers. I have doubt that postponing is as easy as it seems. Because what will be the consequence of postponing? Either you start in 2030 with a big shock and without a smooth transition from no carbon price with moderate and then maybe a bit higher. That, I think, is dangerous, to start from zero to the price we may need in 2030 to achieve our 2030 goal. Or you start in 2030 with a very moderate price, and then, to be honest, neither the Polish government nor any other government has an answer how to achieve the 2030 target of the European Union. So the effort-sharing plans that I know of are not really bringing us to the 2030 target. So that's why we need to be really careful, but we also need to react. And I think there are many elements of a solution. I wouldn't disclose all my ideas here today, but we need to come together. One important element is, of course, much more targeted spending of the revenues and a front loading of the revenues, because the Polish government is of course right that we should assist the people in their transition before the price kicks in. And there are possibilities to do it, and we should immediately start to work on this. Last but not least, CO2 cars. I think, first of all, the Commission is not intending to propose a postponement. That has been in my notes, but it's not true. What the Commission is intending to propose is the same thing that we have on CO2 lorries. So some say it's banking and borrowing, others say it's multi-annual compliance, which means when a company is not able to hit the target in 25, they can overcompensate what is missing in 25, in 26 and 27, which means in the end, it's the same amount of emissions that they have to save. And I think that's justifiable. First of all, it's really, you need to be very sophisticated to find a problem for the climate here. You may find it, but it's really, really a small one. But we have a big problem with the car manufacturers now, and it's not only themselves that are guilty for that. It's also member states didn't bring the necessary infrastructure. They stopped support schemes overnight. So there's a common responsibility to do better. And they have also made mistakes, so part of the responsibility is with them. And definitely, of course, the workers shouldn't suffer from this. So that's why I think it's justifiable what the Commission proposes. And I have to be honest, also, the world has changed in the last months dramatically, but also in the last years. When we introduced the legislation, we introduced the pooling as an idea to help industry to be more flexible. Unfortunately, we see that those that would gain from the pooling are Chinese companies and Tesla. So if we don't approve this Commission proposal, it's money for Musk. And since a few months, I'm more and more convinced that this is not such a good idea. So let's work on solutions, let's work on infrastructure, and let's work on targeted support schemes. The new government in Germany has already decided to bring back a support scheme, but I think they should be different. They should be more targeted to the people really in need, the hardworking people that need their car for the work, but have a low income so that they cannot really afford a clean vehicle. These kind of ideas we need to work on to find solutions. No money for Musk, but money for the hardworking people.
Okay, thank you. Chris, feel for you obviously to pick up on any of that. If we come back specifically to let's pick on the second point first. So you also said we need a tangible strategy for moving away from the internal combustion engine. Do you agree, with Peter, that the Commission's proposal is justifiable? And we had a discussion on it earlier. Indeed, it's needed flexibility from at least Volkswagen's perspective. And we had Julia arguing, nonetheless, there is a risk of these, especially smaller, more affordable models being delayed, even if ultimately, as you said, Peter, the end goal remains unchanged. What's your view on that? And I guess how ready are we? How ready is Poland for the car goals?
Well, my view is I haven't seen it. So Peters obviously knows more than I do. It's in the plan, yeah. But we're going to see soon, I guess. No, I think any change is changing the rules of the game. And I would love to have this kind of, even some kind of delay banking possibility in ETS too. So, for me, giving the industry some more leeway means that the onus is on the population to deliver these reductions earlier, because they will have to cut the emissions. They will have the higher bill, which we calculated as 10% at the pump in 2 years. So, listen, I know that we need to help the industry because they messed up. And, you know, we have to be good parents and say, okay, well, we will not, you know, put you on a naughty stool right now, but please. I think a credible transition strategy should follow the delay, or whatever you can call it, the exemption. Because I think that the whole industry is in a flux. Never mind what the industry position could read in the public. I think there's no one position of the industry. I think different companies want different things. So we need to see what European way should be to actually invest in electric engine. And also, for me, what is important, also from the Polish perspective, is not only a focus on car manufacturers, but also on the whole automotive value chain, because switching one propulsion to another, you also have an impact on the whole value chain. Companies producing clutches and, you know, things that you need in a combustion engine car will not be needed. There's obviously impact on workforce, because the workforce will be smaller for electric car, etc., etc. So that's why this strategy is badly needed. Not only just a fix that will buy us some time, but I fear that a couple of years down the line we could be here again, talking about, oh, let's have another fix. So I think we can excuse them once, but that's it.
Okay, so the current proposal to introduce some more flexibility in the immediate term for you needs to be coupled with a clearer, more substantial strategy to ensure, and I imagine you are adhering to the 2035 goal. We heard from Volkswagen there may indeed be a need for more flexibility further down the line. Are you open to that, or you say at this point it's 2035?
Let's just now focus on the fix. And yeah.
Answer that question another time. And you, Peter?
And ETS too.
Yeah, we'll come to that in a moment.
Yeah, so again, the concerns of the Polish government on ETS2 must be taken very serious, and I'm an EPP politician. Donald Tusk is a very important EPP politician. But also, it was very clear in the German campaign, Friedrich Merz was challenged, and he stood firm. So he showed courage to say, we want market-based, flexible system. So we need to work on improvement, but it won't, the deal to say, we have a bit more flexibility on CO2 cars, so let's do the same on ETS2 is not really appropriate. Why? We have made the calculation when both legislation has been adopted, and I would ask to listen everybody. If we abolish CO2 car completely, and we abolish the ETS completely, 1 and 2, the effect of abolishing CO2 cars for the 2030 target will be only minimal. The effect of abolishing the ETS will be 25 times more. Why? Because CO2 cars regulates only new cars. And if people decide to continue to drive their own car forever, that's bad for the environment and bad for the car industry. So we have this so-called Havana effect. And of course, ETS2 incentivizes not only buying a new car, but also switching to railway, using the bicycle, things that we hopefully never even dare to regulate. So when some people say command and control measures are better, this is dangerous, because I want people to tell they need to go by bicycle because today the sun is shining, and only tomorrow when it rains they are allowed to drive their car. No, no, no. This should be freedom, but everybody who saves CO2 should save money. So that's why the ETS is so much more important. And what I suggest, it's not yet the Parliament's position, it's not the German government position, and also in EPP there are different voices, but my suggestion would be, let's keep the target for 2035, but give industry possibilities to implement it in a technological neutral way. It's in our paper of EPP. E-fuels can be a solution, and especially we regulate not only for Germany, we regulate for Poland. When somebody constantly needs to go to the Ukraine, he may be happy to have a range extender with e-fuels in case there is no charging infrastructure. And the same applies for Greece when they go to Turkey. So some room, and if you don't find a charging infrastructure and you have 10-liter e-fuels in your tank, you will not care if it's €7 or €9. You will care if you come back to your home and be able to drive your car. So, and I'm also in favor of a very limited use of biofuels, sustainable biofuels, but very limited. Then we wouldn't lose any gram of CO2. We wouldn't emit any gram of CO2 more in the atmosphere, but we have the technologically open approach. And I think we should focus on this solution and not about abolishing the target.
Okay, we're going to have to come to a close. But
can I quickly,
yes,
just
I'll
one
give you a chance to end.
couple of sentences, no? Let's be honest.
You're going to have to be brief.
Yeah, I'll be very brief, because I think I need to put this record straight. All economic analysis shows you that it's a myth that carbon trading will reduce car use. It's a fiscal measure. Elasticity of demand for fuel is very stiff. It's very low. So people will just pay more for petrol. You don't really realize if the petrol is 50 cents less or more. They will still buy petrol. So it will only hit the most vulnerable people. But anyway.
Okay, so yes, 2035 target, but technology openness. No, let's delay EU ETS too. And I'm going to leave you two to talk further over the drink on that, on those two issues. A round of applause for Chris and Peter. Because we're up at 6 o'clock and we have two closing speakers, Kurt van den Berger, Director General of DG Klima at the Commission, and Simone Ritzig-Seidel, a member of the Cabinet of Commissioner Apostolos Tzitzikostas, who's the Commissioner for Sustainable Transport and Tourism. So two high-level speakers who've both been here, so a round of applause. They've both been here for the whole event. Which I know isn't always the case, so a big thank you for lasting this long and for being here for all the discussions. So I'd say let's take 5 or 10 minutes. I'm happy for either of you to go first. Some takeaways. What stood out to you? What do you take away from this? What's your take on the state of transport? And where do we go from here? And feel free to pick up on any of the, I guess we've covered a lot, topics that lie closest to your hearts.
Thanks a lot. I'm happy to kick off. And first of all, I would like to thank TND for this event, but also for the state of transport, which I looked into earlier today. It's quite interesting. And so now in my closing remarks, I will briefly touch upon 3 topics that were raised today. One is the corporate fleet. Well, I can't disappoint Sebastian, who said that we will do it. So I will touch upon this. I would also like to say something quick on social leasing, as well as on the scaling up of sustainable fuels in aviation. So on the corporate fleet, it became very clear today that decarbonization of road transport is quite important, still to continue on the good path that we are on. As William pointed out in the beginning, 73% of the emissions come from road transport. Yeah, we have the targets, and we have discussed, we have heard this yesterday, we have heard this today in the discussion. There is the question of supply and demand. And when we think about demand, indeed, there the corporate fleet plays a role. Something that we also have heard today, and I'm quoting here now the figures that you can find also in the state of transport of T&D. So 6 out of 10 cars sold are sold to corporate entities. And when we look into van sales, it's 80% that corporate, and moving on to trucks, 100% of the new trucks are sold to companies or fleets. So, as I said, really an important role in decarbonization, also an important role in demand, and possibly, depending on how an initiative on corporate fleet is done, also on competitiveness. So the mission letter of my commissioner indeed pointed out to a legislative proposal. What we have done early in March as a first step is a communication on corporate fleets, which was also mentioned in the Automotive Action Plan, which came out in early March. And I mean, just very briefly on the corporate fleet, and I think something that did not yet come up, but that I still want to mention. Most people that might not be so familiar with transport policy as you are might think about company cars only. But the corporate fleet, and the figures hinted at that already, can of course go beyond. So it can also cover trucks and even buses. And in that sense, the communication that came out in March leaves this definition and this question still open. So at this stage, we are open to look into different aspects, to look into different ways forwards, targets, tax incentives. I heard several. I even heard social. Well, on the social aspect of the corporate fleets, maybe for me that would be something a bit separate. Just to say, we did an open public consultation in 2024, and there was not a clear consensus on how a European initiative in corporate fleets could look like. And we also heard a number of ideas and views during the automotive dialogues that led up to the Automotive Action Plan. So what we're planning on corporate fleet is to have another high-level dialogue with relevant stakeholders still before the summer. And we will also launch a study for the legislative initiative that we are actually planning then to have in 2025. So very briefly on the social leasing, and I link also here back to the Automotive Action Plan. I mean, EcoScore was one of the things Julia mentioned. It also came up often with other stakeholders as an example that people pointed to. We will have some work to do with member states to talk about best practices, indeed, how things are done, how to incentivize uptake of e-vehicles, be it through tax or other measures. And we aim to have a Commission recommendation on this kind of incentives, but only for 2026. What we already have now, but that is more for the member states, is social leasing schemes can, of course, be done by each member state. And we also give guidance of how member states can ask for funds under the Social Climate Fund to put into such social leasing schemes that could be both for the new vehicles market, but also for the second-hand market. And we will also come out with another recommendation, so again in the social context about transport poverty, where also the uptake of zero-emission vehicles will play a role. Then the last topic I wanted to touch upon was the sustainable fuels in aviation. Yeah, there in 2019, there was a roadmap by the Commission that asked for cutting transport emissions by 90% by 2050. But as pointed out by William earlier today, actually the aviation emissions in 2024 are nearly as high as in 2019. So we are not yet really there. And of course, we have policies already to date which aim to tackle this issue. I mean, just to give two examples, Fuel EU Maritime, well, and then also, of course, Fuel EU for aviation. And we think, however, that more is needed to be faster, to accelerate. And we are currently working on a sustainable transport investment, plan. I think Sébastien from Air France also pointed to this. And maybe just still a few words on that. There, the idea is indeed to focus on stimulating market investment to accelerate the use of clean fuels. And to refer to the Draghi report, which was also mentioned earlier, I mean, I have to meet the statistics here. It estimates the cost of decarbonizing EU aviation at approximately 60 billion euro a year. And I think that EU and member state budget alone will not be able to do this. So we need to find ways how to leverage public and private investment. And as I said, STIP could show the way, but we are still at early stages. And there, I mean, we are looking for your input, for your views on that. We are very happy to have them, so please come to us. And what should this STIP include is measures to better encourage support for specific renewable and low carbon fuels. And there we are looking into different options, how to also use the EU funds as seed money for the support of sustainable aviation and aviation fuel specifically, similar to what the Commission has proposed in the last mandate for hydrogen. As I said, we are looking into this, so first ideas. The aim is to present the sustainable investment plan still in 2025. And with this, I thank you, Leap. Unfortunately, I have to leave because I have a very important appointment with my oldest kids who plays a concert tonight, and I don't want to be late. So sorry for that, and with that, I hand over to Kurt to kindly allow me to speak first, that I still make it on time. Okay.
I'll follow up from where Simone ended, and very happy to be here together with Simone because we work very, very closely with DG Move on all this. It's a great collaboration. I also would like to start by thanking Transport and Environment for this event today, for the state of European transport, and for bringing us together for what I thought was a very good discussion. I think, William, we should organize this every month from now on. What I pick up from this discussion is that there is quite a good firm consensus that we need to stay the course on our climate agenda because this is becoming existential for Europe. Not so much for ecological reasons, but maybe even more for our economic agenda, for competitiveness, for security, but also for geopolitical reasons. What we see happening is that there will increasingly be two camps in the world, an electric camp and a fossil camp of countries. And it's very clear to what camp Europe should belong. And by the way, when you look at it in detail, those in the fossil camp are also those that are least wedded to a multilateral cooperation framework in the world and the rule of law. So I think it's very clear where the future of Europe lies. And continuing this climate agenda of decarbonization is in fact a modernization agenda. It's really about modernizing our economy, our industry, our society, so that it is fit for a future that will be less certain, more competitive, less secure as well. In fact, what is happening since we launched the European Green Deal, and that's also why there is a little bit of apprehension about the speed of this, we created an investment and innovation shock to our system. A shock of innovation and investment that we have delayed for too long, and which actually is at the core of strengthening our productivity and our competitiveness in the future. And what we see is that we're actually on track in delivering on many of the indicators. If we look at investment, we've seen a tripling of investment in clean energy since 2019. When we look at innovations, they're happening, also in Europe. By chance, today, I met with a producer of hybrid aircraft for regional aviation, which is ready to go into production. And they're now choosing whether to do it in Europe or in the United States, where the funding would be possible. We see that in trade, we have a trade surplus, including in cars, that is so big that Mr. Trump takes issue with it. And even if you look at our manufacturing index, it looks actually better than the one in the United States. Where we, of course, do have a serious problem and worry, it's the future of our energy-intensive industries. That is really where it hurts today. And that's a big worry. Also, transport is in the area of the hard-to-abate sectors. But as we've seen from William's presentation, there is no starting to we start to see also a dent in the emissions there, which is very welcome. And actually, we see the same thing happening in another sector that is very hard to decarbonize, buildings, where also in the last year we saw a reduction of emissions by close to 6%. So we're starting to deliver. And when we deliver on decarbonization, what we see is that actually decarbonization is about much more than cutting emissions. That's also why TNE is increasingly talking about production of batteries, industrial policy. All that would have a much harder time if we did not have the climate agenda and the Green Deal. Decarbonization is about defossilization. I should not talk further about this. It was really a consensus that we need to phase out fossils from our system as quickly as possible. It's about having a proper, true industrial policy. That's what we have promised with the Clean Industrial Deal, which is still to be delivered. I agree with Julia. But there is a lot in there. I think we should all agree that there is no silver bullet to getting our industry policy right. But we have set a very clear direction, and it's now on all of us, including the member states, to deliver on this. It's about social policy. For the first time, with the Social Climate Fund, we will address energy and transport poverty in the member states. We have been talking about this for many, many years. For the first time, we will start doing this in a way that it also helps our industrial policy. For example, with social leasing of electric vehicles, hopefully produced in Europe. That's what we wish. And I could go on. Decarbonization is about much more than cutting emissions. Obviously, this is not a walk in the park. If people believed 5 years ago that all this would be a very easy thing to do, then of course we have to manage the expectations about this. There will be bumps in the road. There will be pockets of fog for planes. There will be pirates on the seas, to use different metaphors and not always stick with the car. And I think what is important is that we do not seize every indicator, everything that is happening as a measure of success or of failure. There will be bumps. There will be pirates on the way. But let's make sure that we stay the course and that we see at the indicators that we are staying the course, as William has done so wonderfully well. So, and I'll conclude with this, Sonia, because time is running out. In staying the course, we will apply a policy mix of carbon pricing with regulation and with funding and financing to mobilize the investment. It's the three that we need. It's not one or the other. It's that policy mix that we have and that we have to increasingly get right as we go ahead. And in that, I think we will have to be open to simplification where that makes sense, where we can simplify without creating legal uncertainty. The best way, by the way, to simplify everything would be to have only ETS. And I hear some people in the CDU in Germany talking about ETS prices that would avoid having regulation, so that we can scrap all regulation. I mean, that's the economic theory, which works fine in theory, not in practice. Secondly, we need openness, indeed. We need openness, but I would always add to technological openness the principle of cost efficiency as well. When I hear people talking about technological neutrality because we need nuclear, well, if people believe that nuclear is the solution for our 2030 targets, they will pay a very, very high price. That there is a need for nuclear long term going to 2050, that is probably correct. So If we talk about technological openness, let's immediately couple this with the principle of cost efficiency. And we need to be agile as well and see where there are bumps in the road, where we also from a policy perspective need to act. That's what we did with the CO2 cars regulation, where we have proposed this 3-year averaging. We're not changing the 25 target. Peter Liese has explained it very well. We stick to the target, but we give a little bit more flexibility for car manufacturers to comply with that target. And by the way, we have delivered, I don't know if Chris is still in the room, we have delivered a strategy, an automotive strategy, through the Automotive Industrial Action Plan, which has been welcomed by many, and which clearly gives a direction for succeeding in this transition. Where the decarbonization of cars, let's be clear, the decarbonization of cars is not the end game. The end game is digitalization, is automated and connected driving. And if we believe that we can succeed in this with combustion engine cars, then I think we're all mistaken. But in dealing with these proposals to give a bit more flexibility, it's very important that we do not create further confusion and uncertainty. So I really call on the co-legislators not to use this occasion to reopen everything, which would create a lot of uncertainty for investors. And I was very happy to also hear Sebastian confirm this. And secondly, let's always keep in mind the need to level the playing field so that we don't penalize the front runners, the first movers, because if we chase them away, we erode trust and credibility. And as we all know, trust comes on foot, but flees with a Ferrari, if I can use that image. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Kurt. And thank you all for staying with us until, I think it's just after 6:15. There is a drink just upstairs, I believe. So do stay for that, and you can try and catch Kurt before he flees. But if not, feel free to continue the conversations amongst yourselves, and we look forward to seeing you a year from now for hopefully more good news. Thank you. Thank you.